We were able to persevere and make it through by God's grace, but a lot of people don't. That's why a lot of missionaries go home. Majority of missionaries end up going home within a few years.
As a missionary, full-time missionary who comes back, how can we support you? Obviously monetary, obviously coming on your trips and whatnot. But I think a lot of us know missionary families, or
Right.
hopefully we do.
That's a big question. I feel like I want to write a book on this at some point. Because, us missionaries, we're a unique breed, so we all have similar stories, and so we commiserate with one another. And it's just interesting to see how different churches and denominations relate to their missionaries. We have a lot of stories here and there on some good things and a lot of not so good things. And so that's leading me to understand that I just don't think a lot of churches and believers understand the needs of a missionary. I know for like my wife and I, one of the things we struggle with the most is being on the island, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And so we're over here serving, and very few people check in with us. We have the ability to run trips, and so people come again and again, and that really builds a deeper relationship. So we're a lot better off than maybe some other denominational missionaries that are just working their butts off, serving the Lord, pulling away, and nobody remembers them because it's out of sight, out of mind. A lot of different things that go in. You have to think about missionary kids.
Yeah.
Our kids are growing up with a very unique experience. They live in Africa. They're Americans, but they're growing up in Africa. There's some really good things with that, but there's also some challenges for them. They don't have some of the common experiences that if we were living in America and I was working in the business world. We can't do some of all that. When we go on furlough, we don't have the finances to do some of that maybe what some other people do. And so, my wife and I, we have to work really hard to give them a quality childhood experience.
Yeah.
Because the last thing we want for them is to grow up
Resenting God, maybe?
resenting God, missions, because they were neglected. There's a lot of horror stories with that. Even some really big name preachers, I won't share their stories here, but I know them. They've had some very chaotic events in families because of that. It's not easy how to make ends meet when the ends aren't meeting. And that's hard. Like that was us in the early days. We're blessed that God has increased our support so that we're not figuring out how to buy food at the end of the month. But there was a day when we first moved to Africa, we had about $1,300 of monthly support, and that was not enough. We had bed sheets on the windows as our curtains. We couldn't afford curtains or curtain boxes. We had no kitchen countertops. We had a fold-out table from Walmart and 2 Walmart bins underneath for all of our dishes.
Wow.
That's how my wife made dinner. We were able to persevere and make it through by God's grace, but a lot of people don't. That's why a lot of missionaries go home. Majority of missionaries end up going home within a few years.
Do you think it's because of the lack of the support? Do you think it's...
I think it's a lot of things. It's isolation and loneliness.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's something my wife and I are trying to figure out right now in Zambia. We live in Lusaka, a city of 2 million people. When you live in a place like that, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle, where we haven't been able to build those relationships as we have in other places, and it just makes it hard. It's one of the things we're currently talking about right now, because we need friends, especially her.
Yeah.
Me, I can live from trip to trip.
You see us.
I'm good. You see people come on the trips. I relate for 2 weeks. I'm good for a few months, but my wife has different needs. My kids have different needs. And so that's one of the things we're really struggling with. And that lends itself to when we come home on furlough. I can also be very lonely too, because people don't make room to spend time with you or for their kids to see your kids. And we have, honestly, this is something we've dealt with. You have thoughts at times like, does anybody care?
Yeah.
We've been gone for 2 or 3 years and people don't even have time to have dinner.
Yeah.
Or, oh, you have 5 kids. I don't want to have you over for dinner. And this is real. This is where, there's hurt that can happen. For missionaries, when we come home on furlough, very expensive.
Right.
Because we still have our bills in Africa, but we're also paying a whole new set of bills in America. For us to get to Alaska from here, we're going to be touching $15,000 to $20,000.
15 to 20. Yeah.
And so we'll have to raise support for that. And that's a very real thing, because you're still paying rent, You have to pay security, you have to feed your dog, you have to pay the electricity, you have to pay the water bill, you have to pay the gardener, otherwise you're going to come back and everything on your property is going to be dead because it's dry season, so there's no rain for 6 months. And you got to make sure that security's there 24 hours a day, because if local folks find out you're not there, they're going to come ransack your house because they know you're an American, so you probably have some nicer things. So you have all of these expenses, but then yet you're trying to have housing, you're trying to have a vehicle, you know, you have insurance for the vehicle, you're trying to travel to go different places. So it can be a lot. It can be a big burden for missionaries, especially when they're first starting, and so the level of support they have are lower. You know, I remember we had back-to-back furloughs because we got pregnant. Because of that and everything, we got into $14,000 of debt.
Yeah. Wow.
And you know, it took 5 years to get rid of it. And that was God working a master plan, where the last 7 was paid off by a check from somebody for the amount that we needed, and they didn't know the amount we needed.
The exact amount.
It's a testimony I share about
Yeah.
obedience, because there was an element of obedience with that for me. But that's all very real. And so the financial burdens for missionaries, especially on furlough, are significant. That's just something for people to remember.
Right.
Because, you know, you go places, sometimes you don't have a place to stay. So you have to rent a hotel room, to rent a car, or buy a car and have insurance, but you're still paying for the insurance on the vehicle in Africa. You know, you can have double bills at times. It just makes it really challenging. Just something to keep in mind. Invite the kids over to play with your kids.
Gotcha.
Yes, missionary kids are unique. They're third culture kids. My kids are not quite American. There's a little bit of African.
That's a good thing. I mean, that's what you want to expose your kids to. Really.
I'm not saying it's bad, but
no,
it presents different challenges.
Right.
So they relate differently. Like here in Africa, people don't keep their feelings on their sleeves. It can create some social awkwardness among missionary kids at times because they're just different. They've grown up exposed to different things. So that's just something to keep in mind when a missionary family comes into town. Invite them over to dinner.
Yeah.
Ask them how they're doing. Check in with them. Even when they're on the field, check in with them. Ask them, is there anything you can pray for? Because I would guarantee there's a level of loneliness that they're experiencing.
Yeah.
So those are just the needs that exist. And if the church can be more cognizant of them and ask questions and not be afraid when, well, you know what, we need $5,000 more because we're going into debt, because this is costing us money. Those are all very real conversations, you know, and realize like people are laying down. Like, I enjoy what I do. I love living in Africa. I love the people. I love the cultures. Like, this is a privilege.
It's amazing.
It was not a problem for me to shed my management position in an international spice company to come to Africa. Okay. Emotionally, it was not a sacrifice. Financially, yeah, it was. I lost 80% of my income, but it was not a sacrifice emotionally. We are sacrificing a lot to be on the field.
You are.
I missed a lot of my nephew's life as his godfather. And that's the thing. Like, I've missed a lot of my nieces and nephews and their growth stages. You see them once a year or once every couple years or once every 3 years. You miss things going on in family members' lives. And that's hard. There is a cost to it. I'm not as close to some of my other family members as I used to be. But that's real. My relationship with my nieces and nephews would probably be different if they saw their crazy Uncle Peter a couple times every year. These are all the things you're juggling in order to do what God has called you to do. Because on the ministry side, we know we're having great impact. I know we are.
Massive impact.
Different countries, different cities, different places. It's not an exaggeration to say easily 15 to 20,000 people have come to the Lord in our missionary work, and double that easily of people being healed. So we're seeing the fruit. Like, the sacrifice is worth it eternally, because hundreds of thousands of people have heard the message of the Father's love in our ministry over the years. Hundreds of thousands.
Right. Well, and a lot of the pastors that hear that message, they get set free.
That's
and
right.
then everybody, so it's exponential in that sense.
Correct. Because one of the things I love to do is evangelize the church.
Right. And we need it a lot.
So it's a lot. The sacrifice is great. To me, it's worth it. There is a sacrifice for being on the field, especially for spouses and kids. And it's real. And so if you can remember that and minister to them in a variety of different ways, that helps missionaries be successful in life and in ministry, and then they can stay on the field.
So once they go out and do FaceTime, make sure your kids stay in contact with their
Yep.
kids, whatever that looks like.
Yep.